Got a curly haired tarantula? Want to know how to look after them? Watch this video to find out. Hello everyone, welcome back to Spooderpods. I am David and today we are doing a curly haired tarantula guide. Now, curly haired tarantulas do come in a couple of variants, the hobby variant or the original Nicaraguan variant. This guide will cover both because the husbandry for both is exactly the same. Now the Tliltocatl albopilosus, forgive me if I have mispronounced that, I'll put it down in a little info bar, is a fascinating type of tarantula. They're very common, both the hobby variant and a little bit less Nicaraguan, the true variant, but they are no less adorable and they're very beginner friendly. They're probably one of my favourite types of tarantula and I'm really glad that I got a pair of them at different life stages because I love watching them, they're constantly on display and they just look really interesting. And to be a bit controversial, I actually prefer how the hobby variant looks. Sorry for you purists out there, I think the hobby variant looks a bit nicer. So let's get into this guide. First of all, I want to talk about diet. Now with regards to diet, you can give them the fairly standard fare for tarantulas. We're talking about locusts. Some people like to feed crickets, some people like to feed a variety of worms from all sorts of sizes. We tend to enjoy feeding locusts the most because large locusts are really quite engaging to see them predate upon and chase around. It really is going to be up to you to decide. Make sure that the prey and the species is appropriate for a tarantula. For example, we have Shelob, our fully grown tarantula, or almost fully grown tarantula, and she gets large locusts, she gets large worms, she gets large dubias as her staple diet. Whereas we also have Curly, who's just approaching his juvenile stage, and we want to feed him something a lot more smaller. So he tends to get green bottle flies, he will sometimes get small dubias, and we'll give him the smaller locusts we give to our jumping spiders. Again, make sure the food size appropriate. When they're a sling, you want to generally be feeding them very small flies, pre-killed prey bits. When they get to juvenile, you can up it a bit, and when they get to adult, you're talking about the big stuff. Also, make sure you don't overfeed them or underfeed. Generally, once a week is about right. You can do twice a week if you have a juvenile or a sling, but do use the abdomen as a guide. If it's very big, their rump, maybe slow down a little bit. If it's very skinny, keep offering, and do remove any prey that they haven't eaten after 24 hours. That is the staple advice, and we found it true here too. Now let's talk about enclosure size. When your curly head is fully grown, the kind of minimum you want to be giving them is a 30 centimeters by 20 by 20. They need depth for substrates, they love to burrow, they need room to move around. A little bit larger would be ideal, but that's kind of the minimum. When you're talking about a sling, you want to have like a little deli cup for them initially, and then move them into a 10 by 10 centimeter enclosure. Juvenile, something in between. It is going to be dependent on how quickly they grow and how much you want to see of them, because when they're little they'll be borrowing a lot more. When they get older, obviously they'll be in display a lot, which is awesome. So in the intermediate stage, because Curly's still in his 10 by 10, we're going to put him in a 15 by 10, then we're going to put him in a, I believe it's a 25 by 15 by 15 before finally he goes into adult size enclosure. Do make sure the enclosure is appropriately sized and proportionally sized so you can enjoy them and they can enjoy it too. With your enclosure setup, make sure there's plenty of depth of substrate. You want it to be at least half up, proportionally based on the enclosure, so they can burrow, and so if they climb on a ceiling, which they love to do, they don't fall down and hurt themselves. The hide is really useful. We just use a simple coconut hide. You can use any sort of things, and obviously have some decorations there. Again, make sure there's a water dish as well, just so there's something to maintain humidity, which we'll talk about in a moment, and something they can drink from. With regards to humidity, I've found that humidity seems to be more important when they're younger. They need a bit higher humidity when they're a sling and juvenile. When they get older, you want some, but they're much happier in a drier environment at that stage, because that's kind of where they come from. You still want that water dish, and it's still worth overfilling it a little bit or adding a few droplets elsewhere in the enclosure just to maintain a little bit. But the older they get, the less they need it, as long as you've got that water dish. Temperature wise, you want to maintain a stable room temperature, which is approximately between 21 and 25 degrees Celsius. Apologies for those watching in America, I can't remember the conversion, but generally it's the same old rule. If you're happy, they're going to be happy, and they will be active at that temperature and have no problems. It is important to try and maintain it, because if it does get too cold, they may become lethargic or may become uncomfortable, so do try and keep it up there. We tend to use something called a snuggle safe in winter rather than heat mats, because we find they're a bit safer, especially if we've got parrots, and the heat mats have materials we don't like, and that tends to maintain the temperature nicely and boost it when our heating isn't on. With regards to enrichment, I've kind of already touched upon it, but I thought I'd give its own subsection. For enrichment for your curly hair, you want a hide, you want to make sure that you're also providing a decent depth of substrate, and you can provide some things for them to crawl over and maybe hide behind. They tend to enjoy it. They do like sort of like crawling over sorts of plant material, so you can have fake plants or normal plants. They'll love sitting on top and crawling all over them. Just make it sensibly themed and also enjoyable for you visually as well. Just some other tips in this care guide before I talk a little bit about their behaviour and some of the things you can expect to see. With regards to generalised tips, again, apart from everything I've covered already, which is humidity and the like, make sure that if they are going to pre-molt, you notice them acting a bit strange, you don't try to force feed them or overfeed them. It's better to just let them get on with it, then offer them afterwards. Once they have molted, give them at least a day before you try and feed them again, preferably a little bit more. They won't be hungry, they may even give you a fret pose or get annoyed at you, so it's better just to let them settle down afterwards. If you are providing any enrichment like I talked about in the previous section, make sure there's no sharp edges or anything, because they can accidentally cut themselves or minorly injure themselves. I've seen a couple of owners where they've actually rubbed off some of their rear urticating hairs, which doesn't look, it's not really harmful to them, but it doesn't look very nice. So it's better to make sure the enrichments are appropriate. If you do notice any of that sort of stuff, then maybe change it out for something else. Now with regards to curly haired behaviour, when they're little they will be much faster and they will also hide a lot more. You won't see them very much, they'll only occasionally be out and about. The older they get, the more on display they'll be, and with Shelob she's constantly out, she just sits there and she's quite happy unless she wants to go into a molt or she's just going around to scratch around and dig. Whereas with Curly, coming up to juvenile, we barely ever see him. So do keep that in mind if you get a sling or a little one. You won't see them much till they get older. Also, something that's very common that wrong foots a lot of people with curly hairs is they will climb. A lot of tarantulas do this, but even if the enclosure is appropriately sized, they will climb up the edges, they will go over the ceiling, they will fall down. So that's why, again, substrate depth is important. They will climb all over the place. Don't be alarmed by it. And also make sure that your enclosure top is secure, because they will sometimes frap on it, and if it's like one of those just purely magnetic ones, that can be annoying for you and there is a small risk they can escape. These guys are also very docile. They very rarely give a fret pose or kick off hairs. There are obviously individual variances between different spiders, but as long as you're calm around them and you're not doing anything too sudden, they would rather just flee, or they just quite be sitting there when you get on with your business and maintenance. With regards to enclosure maintenance, don't have to worry too much about it as long as it's nice and stable, and if you had some springtails in there as well to control any mould growth. Any other behavioural tells that you have, please let me know, but as a general rule, they're really easy to look after and they're really charming to watch. So guys, again, any comments, happy to hear from you, your experiences with curly hairs, because I love to share with other people in the community. But in the meantime, from me, Shelob and Curly, take care and see you later.